Hello and welcome to Can Month Day 16, I'm pretty sure. Stark is back because he will not leave me alone. Even though I just fed him, he thinks that I'm harboring more food and just refusing to give it to him. Which, I mean, always be suspicious of the system. Today we're going to be talking about Anne of Green Gables. And I know there are people out there who are not a massive fan of the series. I am not one of those people. So this is going to be a little bit of a gush fest. So if that's gonna gross you out, then you've been warned. I hadn't actually read this book until recently, which I know is like a Canadian sin. When I mentioned that to Emma from Emma Reads, she was like, but you're Canadian, how is that even possible? And it's because I grew up with the movies. Those movies were my life as a child. And I used to live on the East Coast, and we used to go to PEI and hang out in all the Anne of Green Gables stuff. So because I was so like saturated with it, I just kind of was like, I don't even need to read the books. But I had been thinking about picking it up, and I found these amazing editions, and I was like, it's time to do this. If you don't know what the books are about, it is about Anne Shirley, who is an orphaned girl who has had a miserable life, living with really terrible people who did not treat her well. And then we have Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert, who are siblings who live together because neither of them ever married anyone else, and they need help at Green Gables on the farm, and so they decide that they're gonna hire a little orphan boy to help them out. But through some miscommunication, they end up with Anne. And because I have all of those movies essentially memorized, what really struck me at the beginning when I started reading this book is how many like direct lines are in the movies from the books. But one thing that was really missing from the movies that I noticed in the book is the inner dialogue of Marilla and Matthew. Matthew is this painfully shy man who is afraid of people in general, but particularly women and little girls, but is very sweet and thoughtful. And then there is Marilla, who is a lot more strict. She operates under her basic moral codes given to her through Christianity. She expects people to be punctual and do their jobs well. And sometimes she can come off as being a little harsh because she's not great at expressing emotion. So what you get in the book is both of their inner dialogue as characters, whereas you don't get that in the movie at all. So they come across as flatter and also harsher characters because you're not getting the inner dialogue and all of their thoughts and about how Anne is changing them as a person. Whereas in the book, it's just precious. I don't even know how to describe Anne. Like, maybe best character of all time? She is so imaginative and romantic and impulsive and stubborn, and she has a massive temper, and she's just like, she's enchanting. This whole book is enchanting. Ella Montgomery has bewitched me, and the story is heart-wrenching. Just seeing the like simple things that Anne cherishes. And when she goes to school and she's really nervous about what everyone is going to think of her, and they all love her because they value her for her imagination and how fun she is, where that's something that adults kind of see as a fault in her because it makes her forgetful and all over the place. And how someone complimented her at school, and it was like the first compliment she's ever had. Like, that was so like, oh, ugh. And then there's Anne and Matthew. I'm gonna start crying because this is my favorite literary friendship of all time, followed right after by Anne and Diana. To think about the story in its context of when it's taking place in Canada, there is a lot of negative attitudes about immigrants that come through a lot in the story, because at the time there was a lot of really negative prejudiced discourse happening around European immigrants who were coming to Canada. They also talk about politics in this book, which I think is awesome. It's interesting to see too the reasons that people align themselves with certain like political parties or kind of a political identity. There's one particular character, Rachel Lynde, who is just notorious. She's the one who knows everyone's business in the village. She's very opinionated and just all these things. But she identifies as being more, not like what we would consider to be the left part of the political spectrum, but like what we would now see as being kind of more center, which at the time was the left, which is really interesting because another thing that Rachel Lynn does as a character is encapsulate a lot of the ideas about gender. We literally cannot go a single video without me bringing it up. But this is also where I would bring into the discussion the idea of Ella Montgomery being a subversive author. A lot of the stuff that Rachel Lynn says about women is kind of about what is the appropriate place for women in society. But she also believes that women should have the vote. So it's a very complex situation of navigating the patriarchy. So even though Ella Montgomery is including these ideas in her story, she's positioning them in Rachel Lynn, who is almost a caricature. So that kind of contains it. Another way to think about Ella Montgomery as a subversive writer is something that Bree from Bree May actually brought up in the comments on my first video, and it kind of blew my mind, and that's the idea of thinking about Anne as a queer character. This is something that I kind of picked up on when I was reading the book. Firstly, because I was just thinking, obviously all the relationships in the book appear to be quite heteronormative, but even just like statistically speaking, there's queer there somewhere. Like, it's there. And just thinking about like how the story would have been different and how, you know, their lives would have been different and that kind of stuff. But one of the things that stood out to me and what kind of like piqued my interest was near the end of the book. She talks about Anne as not having a particular romantic interest in men, and how what she views as being important is friendship. Like, that's what she's good at. She has a knack for being friends with people, and that's what's important to her. And she wanted to be friends with boys as well because she could see the value in having masculine friendship as just, you know, part of the whole thing. So then I was like, asexual Anne? Is that? I know what happens, okay? Like, I know what goes on later in the story. Not even necessarily asexual or anything, even though there are many different types of asexuality, but there are so many other orientations that could work as well. And one of the things that Bree mentioned is that even though there might be some kind of holes in that idea in terms of like the plot of the story, even though I challenge you, I'll work around them all, that even just thinking of Anne as a queer character just lends so much more positivity and relatedness to the story. So please let me know what you think of that. I have not had such an emotional response to anything in such a long time. After I finished it, me and my sister just talked about everything we remembered happening in the movies and then played the Anne and Gilbert musical soundtrack all day. So this book takes place over a few years, not that many, and already Anne's just, she's growing up already, and I already miss baby Anne, and the rest of the series is gonna kill me.